The bullet missed Rosalind Palmer's head by 3 inches, shattering the window of her father's mercantile and sending glass cascading across the boardwalk, where she stood frozen in terror. Coolidge, Arizona, in the summer of 1882, was a mining town that had grown too fast for its own good, attracting fortune seekers and outlaws in equal measure. Rosalind had lived here her entire 22 years, watching her father Theodore Palmer transform from a simple prospector into the owner of the most productive silver mine in the territory. The wealth had changed their lives, moving them from a cramped cabin to a sprawling house on the hill, but it had also painted a target on their backs. The gunfire erupted from a saloon brawl that had spilled into the street, and Rosalind found herself pressed against the storefront, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had been shopping for fabric, of all mundane things, when violence reminded her once again that civilization here was paper thin. "Get down." The voice was urgent, masculine, and accompanied by strong hands pulling her away from the window just as another shot rang out. Rosalind stumbled backward into a solid chest, and the man's arms came around her protectively as he guided her into the narrow alley between buildings. She caught her breath in the shadows, her bonnet askew, her carefully pinned dark hair coming loose. When she finally looked up at her rescuer, she found herself staring into the bluest eyes she had ever seen, set in a sun-weathered face that belonged to a man perhaps 25 or 26 years old. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy, dusty leather chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. A bandana hung loosely around his neck, and she could see the strong line of his jaw covered in several days of stubble. "Are you hurt, miss?" His voice was lower now, concerned, his hand still steadying her by the shoulders. "No, thank you." Rosalind was surprised to find her voice shaking. She prided herself on being composed, on being the perfect daughter her father's position required, but genuine danger had a way of stripping away social veneers. "That was too close." "Xavier Morrow, madam." He tipped his hat, finally releasing her though he stayed close, his body positioned between her and the street where shouts and the thunder of horses indicated the troublemakers were being rounded up by the town marshal. "Just rode in this morning looking for work. Rosalind Palmer." She straightened her bonnet with trembling fingers, trying to regain her dignity. "My father owns the Palmer mine." Something shifted in his expression, a wariness that she had seen before in men who had their own opinions about mine owners and their families. The miners worked brutal hours in dangerous conditions, and while her father paid fair wages, she knew resentment simmered. She was privileged, protected, and lived in a world entirely separate from the men who descended into the earth each day. "Then I reckon I might be seeing you again, Miss Palmer. I am hoping to get hired on as a guard for the silver shipments." Xavier stepped back, creating proper distance between them. "Your father has been advertising the position." "Oh." Rosalind found herself strangely reluctant to end the conversation. There was something about him, a quiet strength that went beyond just his physical intervention moments ago. "Yes, there have been problems. Bandits hit the last 2 shipments. All clear, folks." The marshal's voice carried down the street. "Sorry about the disturbance." Xavier gestured toward the street. "Safe to return to your shopping, I expect. You be careful, Miss Palmer. This is a rough town." She watched him walk away, his gait easy and confident, and found herself wondering about him. Who was Xavier Morrow? Where had he come from? The questions felt improper, too forward, but they lingered in her mind as she completed her shopping in a distracted daze. That evening at dinner, Rosalind sat across from her father at their long mahogany table, brought all the way from San Francisco at great expense. Theodore Palmer was a barrel-chested man of 53, with steel gray hair and the perpetually worried expression of someone who had much to lose. Her mother had died 7 years ago of pneumonia, leaving Rosalind as the lady of the house, a role she had grown into with grace if not enthusiasm. "I heard about the trouble in town today," Theodore said, cutting into his steak. "Their cook, Mrs. Henderson, had outdone herself as usual, but Rosalind found she had little appetite." "You were there." "A stray bullet came close," she admitted, knowing he would hear about it anyway. Coolidge thrived on gossip. "A cowboy pulled me to safety, said his name was Xavier Morrow." Her father's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Morrow? Yes, I interviewed him this afternoon. Hired him on the spot, actually. He has experience riding guard for the Butterfield stage lines, good references. We need reliable men." "Is the situation really that dangerous?" Rosalind had heard her father's concerns, but he usually downplayed them in her presence, trying to shield her from worry. Theodore sighed heavily. "The bandits are getting bolder. They know the shipment schedule. I suspect we have someone on the inside feeding them information, but I cannot prove it." He met her eyes seriously. "I want you to stay close to home for a while, Rosalind, until this is sorted." She felt the familiar cage of protection closing around her. "Father, I cannot live like a prisoner." "No, but you can be sensible. You are all I have left in this world." His voice roughened with emotion. "Humor an old man's fears." Rosalind reached across and squeezed his hand. "You are not old, and I will be careful, I promise." But being careful and being confined were two different things. And 3 days later, Rosalind found herself riding her mare, Daisy, out toward the foothills where the land opened up into scrub desert, punctuated by saguaro cacti and rocky outcroppings. She had told Mrs. Henderson she was visiting the Reverend's wife, a small deception that pricked her conscience, but she needed air and space and freedom. The heat was intense, even in late afternoon, the August sun beating down mercilessly. She wore her lightest dress, pale blue cotton that was already showing dust stains at the hem, and carried a canteen of water. The desert had a stark beauty that called to her, so different from the cramped darkness of the mine tunnels she had toured once at her father's insistence. She had hated every moment underground, the weight of earth pressing down, the knowledge of how easily those tunnels could collapse. She guided Daisy along a familiar trail, one that led to a small spring-fed pool where cottonwood trees provided precious shade. It was her secret place, though she supposed others knew of it too. The desert kept few secrets. When she arrived, however, she found she was not alone. A horse was tethered nearby, a sturdy bay, and near the water's edge stood Xavier Morrow. He had removed his shirt and was washing in the shallow pool, his back to her, and Rosalind froze, knowing she should announce her presence or quietly retreat, but finding herself doing neither. His back was a map of hard work, muscles defined and tanned, and she saw a scar running along his right shoulder blade, pale against his skin. Then he turned, perhaps sensing her presence, and their eyes met across the small clearing. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Xavier grabbed his shirt, pulling it on quickly. "Miss Palmer, I apologize. I thought I was alone." "No, I should apologize for intruding." Rosalind felt heat in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the desert sun. "This is a favorite spot of mine, but clearly it is yours as well. I have been patrolling the area, learning the terrain. Your father wants guards familiar with all the routes the silver could take." Xavier had buttoned his shirt but left it untucked, still damp from the water. He looked younger somehow, less guarded than in their first meeting. "I did not expect to see anyone out here. I told my father I would stay close to home." The confession came out before she could stop it. But I have been going to that house on the hill my entire life when I needed to escape. Sometimes it feels like a beautiful prison." Xavier studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling he saw past the expensive dress and privileged life to something truer underneath. "Your father wants to protect you. That is not unreasonable given the threats." "I know." Rosalind dismounted, leading Daisy to the water. But knowing something logically and feeling its rightness are not always the same thing. "No, they are not." Xavier moved to give her space but did not leave. "My mother used to say that some birds are meant for cages, bred to them, content with their bars. But others are born wild, and caging them, even in gold, only makes them pine away." "Which kind are you?" The question was too personal, too direct, but something about this place, this moment, made normal social rules seem absurd. "The wild kind, I reckon." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Though I have tried to settle, take normal work, it never quite sticks. I get restless." "And yet you have taken a job guarding silver shipments, which sounds fairly settled to me, for now." Xavier crouched by the pool, scooping water to drink. "But this job has an end date. Once your father's bandit problem is solved, I will move on. That is how I live." Rosalind sat on a flat rock in the shade, properly though she knew propriety was already compromised by being here alone with him. "That sounds lonely. Freedom usually is." Xavier looked at her directly. "But loneliness is just the price you pay for not being tied down, not having people depending on you or controlling your choices." She heard the philosophy born of pain, of someone who had perhaps been tied down once and broken free at cost. "Where are you from, originally?" "Texas. Grew up on a cattle ranch outside of San Antonio. When the war came, I was too young to fight, but my 2 older brothers went. Neither came back." His voice was matter of fact, but she heard the old grief beneath. "My father never recovered from losing them. He drank himself to death by the time I was 17. I sold the ranch to pay his debts and just started riding." "I am sorry." The words felt inadequate. "That is a heavy load to carry at 17. We all have our burdens, Miss Palmer. Yours might be lighter than some, but that does not make them less real to you." Xavier stood, brushing dust from his pants. "I should get back to my patrol. Your father is paying me to keep his interests secure." "Wait." Rosalind was not sure what prompted the word, but she did not want him to leave yet. The conversation, the unexpected honesty, it felt precious somehow. "How did you know this spring was here?" "Followed the cottonwoods. They only grow where there is water." Xavier paused. "Also, there are tracks. Deer, coyote, and one very light horse that I would guess is yours. You come here often." "I used to come with my mother before she died. She loved the desert, said it was honest. No pretense, just survival and beauty intertwined." Rosalind surprised herself with the admission. She rarely spoke of her mother to anyone. "She sounds like she was wise." Xavier's expression softened. "And she was right. The desert does not lie about what it is, unlike people. Unlike most people." Xavier settled his hat back on his head. "But some of us try for honesty when we can afford it. And when you cannot afford it, then we do what we must to survive, same as any creature out here." He united his horse. "Be careful riding back, Miss Palmer. The sun will set soon, and you do not want to be caught out after dark. The night brings out hunters." He rode off before she could respond, and Rosalind sat by the spring for a long while after, thinking about their conversation. There was something magnetic about Xavier Morrow, something that pulled at her in ways she did not fully understand. It was not just his appearance, though she would be lying to pretend that did not factor. It was his self-possession, his clear-eyed view of the world, so different from the men in her social circle who postured and performed and said what they thought she wanted to hear. Xavier had spoken to her like an equal, not a fragile flower to be protected or a prize to be won. He had shared real pieces of himself, and in doing so, invited her to do the same. It was dangerous, she thought, dangerous and exhilarating. The next week passed in a strange pattern. Rosalind attended to her expected duties, hosting a tea for the Ladies' Charitable Society, overseeing the household accounts, accompanying her father to Sunday service at the small church. But her thoughts kept drifting to the cowboy with the honest blue eyes and the philosophy of freedom. She saw him around town occasionally, always professional, always respectful. He would tip his hat, call her Miss Palmer, and move on with whatever business he had. She learned from her father that Xavier was proving exceptionally competent, that he had already identified 2 men working at the mine who were likely passing information to the bandits. One had confessed under the marshal's questioning, validating Xavier's instincts. "The man has a sharp eye," Theodore said approvingly over breakfast, "and he is not afraid of hard work. Rides patrol morning and evening, studies the men, asks good questions. I am glad I hired him." "He seems very capable," Rosalind agreed, trying to keep her voice neutral and knowing she probably failed. Her father gave her a sharp look but said nothing, for which she was grateful. On Thursday afternoon, her friend Margaret Sullivan called at the house, full of gossip and energy as always. Margaret was the daughter of the town's only doctor, a plump, cheerful woman of Rosalind's age who had been engaged 3 times and broken it off each time, to her mother's despair. "Have you seen the new guard your father hired?" Margaret settled into the parlor with obvious relish. "All the girls in town are talking about him, Xavier Morrow. He is positively dashing in that rough way some cowboys have." "I have made his acquaintance," Rosalind said carefully, pouring tea from the silver service. "He seems very professional." "Professional," Margaret laughed. "Darling, the man looks like he stepped out of a dime novel, strong and mysterious with that square jaw and those eyes." Sarah Jensen tried to engage him in conversation outside the general store and said he was polite but completely uninterested. Which of course only makes every unattached woman in Coolidge more determined to catch his attention. Rosalind felt an unexpected spike of something that might have been jealousy, which was absurd. She had no claim on Xavier Morrow, no right to feel possessive. Perhaps he is simply focused on his work, or perhaps he has someone waiting for him somewhere. Margaret bit into a cookie. That is what makes him even more romantic, do you not think? The mysterious wanderer with a tragic past. You are incorrigible. But Rosalind smiled despite herself. "Not every man is a character in a story, Margaret. No, but some of them are more interesting than others. The men here, the respectable ones with their mining investments and their talk of ore veins and market prices, they bore me to tears." Margaret leaned forward conspiratorially. "Is it terrible that I want something more? Some excitement before I settle into marriage and children? Not terrible. Human." Rosalind thought of her conversation with Xavier by the spring. "I think we all want to feel truly alive sometimes, not just going through the expected motions." "Exactly." Margaret seized on the thought. "You understand. But what can we do? We are women in a mining town in Arizona. Our choices are limited to which mining investor or shop owner or rancher we marry, unless we want to become school teachers or mail-order brides. There has to be more possibility than that." Even as she said it, Rosalind heard the wishful thinking in her own words. Margaret was right. Their options were constrained by society, by geography, by gender. If you discover what those possibilities are, please share them with me. Margaret sighed dramatically. "In the meantime, I suppose I shall continue rejecting proposals and giving my mother palpitations." After Margaret left, Rosalind found herself restless. She walked through the house, too large for just her and her father, too full of expensive objects that were meant to prove their status. She paused in front of the mirror in her bedroom, studying her reflection. Dark hair pinned up properly, brown eyes that her mother had called expressive, features that were pleasant if not remarkable. She looked like what she was, a wealthy mine owner's daughter, respectable and refined. But inside, she felt something else stirring. A wanting that had no name, a hunger for experiences and feelings she had only read about in books. Xavier had said some birds were born wild. Was she? Or was she fooling herself, romanticizing a cowboy because he represented escape from her predictable life? That night at dinner, her father seemed distracted, his usual appetite absent. "Is something wrong?" Rosalind asked, concerned. Theodore set down his fork with a heavy sigh. "We are moving a large shipment tomorrow, the largest yet. 3 months of silver production, worth over $50,000. I have hired extra guards, including Morrow and 2 others he recommended. But I am worried. You think the bandits know? I think they have ways of finding out everything that matters. I have tried to keep the details quiet, changed the route, the timing. But still, I worry." He rubbed his eyes tiredly. "Sometimes I think about selling the mine, taking you away from here, maybe to San Francisco or back east. Father." Rosalind reached across the table. "This mine is your life's work. You built this from nothing. And what good is it if something happens to you because of it?" Theodore's voice was fierce. "You are my life's work, Rosalind, the only thing that truly matters." She felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Nothing will happen to me. I will stay here tomorrow, safe at home, while you oversee the shipment. And everything will go smoothly, you will see." But her optimistic words proved tragically wrong. The attack came at dawn, when the heavily laden wagons were barely an hour outside of Coolidge. Rosalind heard about it from Mrs. Henderson, who had gotten the news from the butcher's boy who had ridden out to watch the departure and seen the aftermath. 6 bandits, maybe more, Mrs. Henderson reported, her face pale. "They hit them hard and fast. There was shooting. Some men are hurt, maybe worse." Rosalind felt ice run through her veins. "My father—" "I do not know, miss. They have taken the wounded to Doc Sullivan's. I only heard pieces." Rosalind did not wait to hear more. She ran from the house, not bothering with a carriage, her skirts clutched in her hands as she sprinted down the hill toward town. Her heart hammered painfully, her breath coming in gasps. Please let him be all right. Please. The scene at the doctor's office was chaos. Men crowded the waiting area, some bleeding, others simply shaken. She pushed through them, frantic. "My father, Theodore Palmer, is he here, Miss Palmer?" Xavier appeared at her elbow, and she nearly sobbed with relief at seeing him standing, apparently unharmed except for a graze on his left arm that had bled through his shirt. "Your father is all right, shaken up but not hurt. Thank God." Her legs suddenly felt weak. "What happened?" "Let me take you to him." Xavier guided her through the crowd to a back room where her father sat in a chair, looking every one of his 53 years and then some. His face was gray, his hands trembling. "Father," Rosalind dropped to her knees beside him, taking his hands. "Are you hurt?" No, just old and scared." Theodore gripped her hands tightly. "They were waiting for us, Rosalind, knew exactly where we would be. It was an ambush." "How much did they get?" She knew it was not the most important question, but she needed to understand the scope of the disaster. "All of it. 50,000 in silver just gone." Theodore's voice broke. "And 2 men dead, good men with families, because I insisted on moving that shipment." Xavier spoke from where he stood near the door. "It was not your fault, Mr. Palmer. The bandits would have hit any shipment eventually. At least we were prepared enough to avoid more casualties. 2 deaths are too many." Theodore looked at Xavier. You saved my life today, pulled me down when the shooting started. I owe you more than wages can repay. I was doing my job." But Rosalind saw something in Xavier's face, a grim satisfaction that he had at least protected her father, even if he could not stop the robbery. Over the next hours, the full story emerged. The bandits had been organized and professional, hitting fast and retreating before reinforcements could arrive from town. They had killed the 2 guards riding at the front of the convoy, then used the horses to block the road while they looted the silver. Xavier and the other guards had returned fire, wounding at least 1 bandit, but they had been outnumbered and outgunned. "Did you recognize any of them?" The marshal, a weathered man named Tom Brennan, was taking statements. "They wore bandanas covering their faces," Xavier reported. "But I noticed something. The leader, he wore a ring on his right hand, silver with a distinctive turquoise stone. I have seen that ring before." "Where?" The marshal leaned forward. "On Jack Reeves. He works at the Palmer mine in the smelting operation." The name sent a murmur through the room. Rosalind knew Reeves by sight, a tall, thin man with a perpetual sneer. He had been with the operation for about 2 years. "That is a serious accusation," Marshal Brennan said slowly. "It is also accurate. I am certain it was the same ring, unique enough to be identifiable." Xavier's voice was flat, factual. "I suggest you bring him in for questioning." Within hours, Jack Reeves was in custody and faced with the evidence of his ring and his unexplained absences from work. He cracked. He named his accomplices, revealed where some of the stolen silver was hidden, and admitted to being the inside source feeding information to the bandit gang for months. The recovery of about half the stolen silver was some consolation, though it could not bring back the 2 dead guards. Their funerals were held that Sunday, somber affairs that reminded everyone how precarious life was in the Arizona Territory. Rosalind attended, standing beside her father as they paid respects to men who had died protecting Palmer property. The weight of that responsibility hung heavy on her. These men had families, children, lives cut short because of silver pulled from the earth. After the service, she found herself standing in the cemetery, looking out over the desert landscape. The town of Coolidge spread below, a collection of wooden and adobe buildings that seemed both permanent and temporary at once. Everything here existed on the edge, prosperity and disaster separated by the thinnest of margins. "Difficult day." Xavier's voice came from behind her. She had not heard him approach. "Those men died for us, for my father's silver." Rosalind kept her eyes on the horizon. "How do we live with that? By honoring their sacrifice, by making sure their families are cared for, by continuing on because stopping does not bring them back." Xavier came to stand beside her, his presence solid and somehow comforting. "Death is part of life out here, Miss Palmer. That does not make it easier, but it is the truth." The desert's honesty again. Yes. They stood in silence for a moment, and Rosalind found herself achingly aware of him. The way he stood, relaxed but alert, the faint scent of leather and sage that clung to him, the simple competence he projected, so different from the performing and posturing she was used to. "You saved my father's life," she said quietly. "Thank you seems inadequate, but thank you." "I am glad I was there." Xavier paused, and she sensed he was choosing his words carefully. "Your father is a good man, one of the better mine owners I have encountered. He cares about more than just profit. He does. This will haunt him, though, those deaths. Probably. But that is what makes him decent. A harder man would just see it as the cost of business." Rosalind turned to look at him directly. "And what do you see it as?" "As the wages of civilization trying to take root in wild country. Sometimes the roots take hold. Sometimes they get pulled up bloody." Xavier met her gaze steadily. The question is whether the fruit that eventually grows is worth the cost of planting. That is a very philosophical view for a cowboy. She meant it teasingly, but he did not smile. Cowboys have plenty of time to think, Miss Palmer. Hours in the saddle, nights under stars. Philosophy is cheap entertainment when you cannot afford much else. I would like to hear more of your philosophy sometime. The words came out before she could reconsider them, too forward, too revealing of her interest. Something shifted in Xavier's expression, a careful weighing of options. That might not be wise. You are Theodore Palmer's daughter. I am a hired hand who will move on soon enough. Our worlds do not exactly align. Maybe they could. Rosalind knew she should let it drop, maintain propriety, but she found she could not. Maybe our worlds are not as separate as they appear. Miss Palmer. Xavier's voice was gentle but firm. You are young, privileged, and destined for a life I cannot offer. I have nothing but a horse, a saddle, and a reputation for being reliable in a fight. That is not the foundation for anything lasting. I am not asking for forever. Though even as she said it, Rosalind wondered if that was entirely true. I am asking for honesty, for conversation, for whatever brief time you are here. Is that so terrible? Xavier studied her for a long moment, and she saw the war in his eyes between attraction and duty, between what he wanted and what he thought was right. Finally, he shook his head slowly. You are going to be trouble, Miss Palmer. Rosalind. My name is Rosalind. Rosalind. He said it carefully, as if testing the weight of the informality. All right, then. But understand, I will not make you promises I cannot keep. When my work here is done, I ride on. That is who I am. I understand. She felt a thrill run through her, dangerous and exciting. I am not asking you to change who you are, Xavier. I am only asking you not to pretend I do not exist when we both know there is something here worth exploring. Something worth exploring, he repeated, and this time he did smile just slightly. That is one way to put it. All right, Rosalind, but we should be discreet. Your father has enough worries without adding scandal to them. Agreed. Rosalind felt giddy, reckless in a way she never had before. The spring, tomorrow at sunset, if you can get away. I will be there. Xavier touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that felt both formal and intimate. Now you should probably return to where proper people can see you with me. Standing together in a cemetery is already pushing the boundaries. He was right, of course. Rosalind made her way back toward where her father waited by the carriage, but she felt transformed, as if she had just stepped through a doorway into a new version of her life. It was foolish, probably, to feel so much over so little. A conversation in a cemetery, an agreement to meet. Nothing significant in the grand scheme of things. But it felt significant. It felt like the beginning of something that could not be called back once started. That night she lay awake, staring at her ceiling, thinking about Xavier. What was it about him that called to her so strongly? She had been courted before, by respectable men her father approved of. She had even considered accepting one or two of them, had imagined what life would be like as a wife and mother in Coolidge. But always something had held her back, a sense of settling, of closing doors before she had fully explored what lay beyond them. Xavier represented those unexplored rooms, those unopened doors. He was different, unpredictable, outside the neat boxes society wanted to put people in. And he treated her differently too, not as a prize or a delicate ornament, but as a person capable of honest conversation and real choice. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Rosalind went through her routines mechanically, her mind already at the spring, already in the conversation to come. She told Mrs. Henderson she would be visiting the cemetery again to lay flowers, a small lie that stung her conscience but seemed necessary. Her father was preoccupied with mine business, meeting with the marshal and his foreman to discuss improved security measures. She rode out as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The heat of the day was fading into the cooler temperatures of evening, and a slight breeze carried the scent of creosote and sage. The desert was beautiful like this, softened by the slanting light, less harsh and more mysterious. Xavier was already at the spring when she arrived, watering his horse. He had clearly come straight from patrol, still dusty from riding, and he looked up as she approached with an expression she could not quite read. "You came," he said, as if there had been doubt. "Of course I came." Rosalind dismounted, tethering Daisy. "Did you think I would not? I thought you might reconsider. Decide this was too risky, too improper." Xavier leaned against a cottonwood trunk, watching her with those steady blue eyes. "That you would remember who you are and who I am and realize this is a bad idea. It probably is a bad idea." Rosalind sat on her favorite rock, "but I find I do not care as much about that as I should. That is dangerous thinking for a woman in your position." "Why?" The question came out more forcefully than she intended. "Why should I care so much about my position? What has it given me besides comfort and constraint? I am 22 years old and I feel like I have been living behind glass, watching life happen but never really touching it." Xavier was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke his voice was thoughtful. "I understand that feeling. It is like being a ghost, going through motions but not fully inhabiting your own existence." "Yes." Rosalind felt a rush of relief at being understood. "Exactly that. And then you showed up, and when I talk to you, I feel present, real, like I am actually here in my own life instead of performing it for an audience. That is a lot to put on a cowboy you barely know." But she could see he was affected by her words, that they meant something to him. "I am not sure I can live up to that expectation. I am not expecting you to solve my existential crisis, Xavier." Rosalind almost laughed. "I am just grateful to be able to speak honestly for once. Do you know how much of my life is carefully calibrated conversation? Saying the right things to the right people, being pleasant and agreeable and decorative, sounds exhausting. It is." She picked up a small stone, turning it over in her fingers. "My mother, before she died, she told me that there was more to life than being good and safe. She said she had been wild once, before marriage tamed her, and that she regretted letting that part of herself die. She made me promise not to do the same. But you have been trying to keep that promise while also being the daughter your father needs." Xavier moved to sit near her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "That is an impossible balance. Tell me about your life." Rosalind turned the conversation away from herself. "What is it like, moving from place to place? Do you ever get tired of it?" Xavier considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. There are moments, usually late at night, when I think about what it would be like to have a home, people who know me, roots going deep instead of surface level. But then morning comes and I feel the pull of the horizon, the need to see what is over the next hill. That sounds lonely. It can be, but it is also freedom, and I have learned that is worth the loneliness." He glanced at her. "You said you feel constrained by your life." "I chose constraints early on when I sold my family's ranch. I chose to be unattached. They are different kinds of limitation. But you chose yours. I did not choose mine. I was born into them." "That is fair." Xavier picked up his own stone, throwing it to skip across the spring's surface. "So what would you choose if you could choose anything? If there were no expectations, no obligations?" Rosalind had never really let herself think about it, not seriously. But here, in the golden light of desert evening, with a man who might actually listen to her answer, she let herself imagine. "I would travel, see places beyond Arizona, maybe write about them. My mother used to keep journals about the desert, about the plants and animals, about the way light changes throughout the day. I found them after she died and they were beautiful, but she never shared them with anyone. Why not? Because it was not proper for a mine owner's wife to care about such things. She was supposed to care about social standing and household management. Rosalind felt old anger on her mother's behalf. She had all this creativity and intelligence, and it got buried under expectations. You could honor her by not letting yours get buried too. Xavier's voice was quiet but intense. You could be different. How? I am still Theodore Palmer's daughter. I still have responsibilities. Responsibilities are not the same as imprisonment. Xavier shifted to face her more directly. Your father loves you. From what I have seen, he wants you happy. Have you ever actually told him what you want? The question struck home because the answer was no. She had never really articulated her desires to her father, had always assumed he would not understand or would dismiss them. But was that fair? Theodore had loved her mother, had grieved her loss profoundly. Would he want Rosalind to follow the same path of suppressed dreams? I have not, she admitted. I have been afraid, I suppose, afraid of disappointing him or of asking for something impossible. Nothing you have described sounds impossible. Difficult maybe, unconventional but not impossible. Xavier's hand moved as if to touch hers, then stopped, hovering in the space between them. The question is whether you have the courage to try for it. Rosalind looked at his hand, suspended in that moment of almost touching, and made a choice. She reached out and took it, lacing her fingers through his. His skin was calloused and warm, and the contact sent a shiver through her entire body. Xavier did not pull away, but his expression became conflicted. Rosalind, I know. She held his hand firmly. This is complicated, maybe even wrong by society's standards, but it feels right, Xavier. This moment, this conversation, your hand in mine, it all feels more real than anything has felt in years. What do you want from me? The question was raw, vulnerable. Because I meant what I said. I cannot promise forever. I am not the settling kind. I do not know what I want. The honesty felt liberating. But I know I want to find out. I want more conversations like this. More truth. More feeling. Even if it ends, even if you ride away eventually, I want to have really lived something instead of just watching my life happen. Xavier's thumb traced across her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. You could get hurt. I am already hurting, just in a different way, this slow suffocation of being someone I am not. Rosalind squeezed his hand. At least with you, I would feel the pain of something real. That is a hell of a thing to say. But Xavier was looking at her with such intensity that she felt stripped bare, seen completely. All right. We do this, whatever this is, but with eyes open. No illusions, no false promises. Honest even when honesty is hard. Agreed. Agreed. Rosalind felt something unlock in her chest, a door she had not realized was sealed until it opened. Thank you. For what? For seeing me. For talking to me like I am a person with a mind, not just a pretty thing to be protected and controlled. She held his gaze. You unearthed feelings I never knew existed, Xavier. Or maybe I knew they existed, but I had buried them so deep I forgot they were there. Xavier brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles softly. The gesture was old-fashioned, chivalrous, and yet it sent heat through her entire body. You did some unearthing yourself, Rosalind. I have spent 8 years keeping my distance from anything that feels like attachment. Then you stumbled into my life with your honest eyes and your trapped bird heart, and suddenly distance feels like the last thing I want. They sat together as the sun finally set, hands joined, talking about everything and nothing. Xavier told her about his travels, the places he had seen from Texas to Montana. He described the first time he saw the ocean in California, The way the endless water had both terrified and mesmerized him. He talked about the different kinds of work he had done, from cattle drives to stage guard to a brief stint working at a lumber camp in Oregon. Rosalind told him about her childhood in Coolidge, about watching the town grow from a rough mining camp into something resembling civilization. She described her mother's illness, the long weeks of watching her fade, the hollow ache that had never completely healed. She admitted her complicated feelings about her father's success, how she was grateful for the comfort it brought but resented the isolation. By the time the first stars appeared, Rosalind felt as if she had known Xavier for years instead of days. There was an ease between them, a natural rhythm to their conversation that she had never experienced before. "I should get you back before your father sends out a search party," Xavier said reluctantly. "It is full dark and you told him you would be careful. I suppose you are right." Rosalind stood but kept hold of his hand for one more moment. "Can we do this again? I would like that." Xavier helped her onto Daisy with steady hands. "Day after tomorrow, same time." "Yes." Rosalind looked down at him, memorizing his face in the starlight. "Be safe on your patrols, Xavier." "Always am." He mounted his own horse. "I will ride back with you, make sure you get home safely." They rode together in comfortable silence, and when they parted at the edge of town where anyone might see them, Rosalind felt the loss of his presence like a physical thing. But she also felt alive, awakened, as if color had been added to a world she had only seen in shades of gray. Over the next weeks, a pattern developed. Rosalind and Xavier would meet at the spring every few days, whenever his patrol schedule and her social obligations allowed. They talked, sharing pieces of their lives, their thoughts, their dreams. Sometimes they sat close enough to touch, hands brushing, shoulders bumping. Other times they maintained careful distance, as if both were aware of how easily proximity could tip into something more dangerous. The mine security situation improved dramatically with the bandit gang broken up. Theodore was able to ship silver with much less anxiety, and the town of Coolidge settled into a period of relative calm. But Rosalind found herself in increasing turmoil. She was falling in love with Xavier Morrow. She tried to tell herself it was infatuation, rebellion, the thrill of something forbidden. But she knew better. Love had crept up on her through all those conversations, through his steady presence and his refusal to treat her as anything less than his equal. She loved the way he listened, really listened, and the way he challenged her assumptions. She loved his competence, his quiet strength, his moments of unexpected humor, and she could see that he was struggling with similar feelings. He was more careful now about physical contact, as if he did not trust himself. He sometimes looked at her with such longing that it took her breath away. But he never pushed, never demanded more than she was willing to give. "I am thinking about moving on soon," Xavier said one evening, the words dropping like stones into the peaceful moment. They were at the spring, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Rosalind felt her heart clench. "Your job is not finished. The mine still needs guards. The immediate threat is gone. Your father can hire local men now, people who are not wanderers like me." Xavier kept his eyes on the horizon. "I am getting too comfortable here. That is dangerous for someone like me." Dangerous how? But she knew the answer. Because comfortable leads to attached. Attached leads to staying. And I do not stay, Rosalind. It is not who I am. But his voice lacked conviction. "Is it who you are?" Rosalind turned to face him. "Or is it who you have chosen to be because it feels safer than risking your heart again?" Xavier's jaw tightened. "You do not know what you are talking about." "Do I not?" She pressed on, knowing she might be pushing too hard but unable to stop. "You lost your family. Your brothers died, your father drank himself to death. So you decided never to care about anything or anyone enough that losing them would hurt. Is that not it? And what if it is? Xavier stood abruptly, pacing. What is wrong with protecting yourself from pain? Nothing, except you are also protecting yourself from joy, from connection, from being fully alive. Rosalind stood too, facing him. You accused me of living behind glass, but you are doing the same thing. Your glass is just made of distance and detachment instead of propriety and expectation. At least I am honest about it. Xavier's voice was sharp. I told you from the beginning I would leave. You agreed to that. I did. Rosalind felt tears threaten but refused to let them fall. But that was before I fell in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Xavier stared at her, his expression a mixture of panic and something that might have been hope. Rosalind, you cannot. I can and I do. She stepped closer to him. I love you, Xavier Morrow. I love your honesty and your strength and the way you see the world. I love how you talk to me and listen to me and treat me like I matter. I love you, and I think you love me too, even if you are too afraid to admit it. This is insane. But Xavier did not step back, did not create distance. I am a cowboy with nothing to offer you. You deserve so much more. I deserve to choose my own life. Rosalind reached up, touching his face, feeling the rough stubble under her fingers. And I choose you, if you will have me. Even if it is hard, even if we have to figure out how to bridge our different worlds, I choose you, Xavier. I do not know how to do this. Xavier's voice was raw. I have spent 8 years alone. I do not know how to be with someone. Then we learn together. Rosalind smiled through tears that were now falling despite her efforts. We figure it out as we go. That is what people who love each other do. Xavier pulled her into his arms then, holding her tightly, his face buried in her hair. She felt him trembling slightly, this strong man undone by emotion he had tried so hard to suppress. When he finally pulled back enough to look at her face, his eyes were suspiciously bright. I do love you, he admitted. I have been fighting it for weeks, telling myself it was temporary, that I would get over it, but it just keeps growing, this feeling. You have gotten under my skin, into my heart, and I do not know how to get you out. I do not know if I want to. Then do not. Rosalind touched her forehead to his. Stay. Choose to stay, Xavier, not because you have to, but because you want to, because this us is worth the risk. Your father will never approve. But even as he raised the objection, she could hear him wavering. My father wants me to be happy. And you make me happy, Xavier. You make me feel alive and real and like myself for the first time in my life. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Let me talk to him. Let me at least try. And if he says no, if he forbids it, then we make a choice. Rosalind felt the weight of what she was suggesting. I would choose you, Xavier, over comfort, over security, over my father's approval. I would choose you. Do not say that. Xavier looked almost frightened. You should not have to choose between me and your family. Hopefully, I will not. But I need you to know that if it came to it, I would. She held his face in both her hands now. I am not playing at this, Xavier. I am serious. You are not temporary for me. You are everything. Xavier kissed her then, finally closing the distance between want and action. His lips were gentle at first, questioning, and then more certain as she responded. Rosalind felt like she was falling and flying at the same time, every nerve alive, every sense heightened. She had been kissed before, chased pecks from would-be suitors, but nothing like this. This was hunger and tenderness, passion and promise all tangled together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers again. I am terrified. Me too. Rosalind laughed shakily. But better terrified and alive than safe and empty, right? Your philosophy is dangerous, Miss Palmer. Good thing you seem to like danger, Mr. Morrow. They held each other as the stars emerged, making quiet plans and promises. Xavier would stay in Coolidge, at least for now. Rosalind would speak to her father. They would take it step by step, day by day, and see if love could really bridge the gap between their different worlds. When Rosalind finally rode home that night, she felt transformed. Fear and hope warred within her, but underneath both was a deep certainty. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they faced, she and Xavier would face them together. She had chosen her path, and it led toward him. Theodore Palmer was waiting in the parlor when she arrived, and one look at his face told her that somehow he knew something had changed. Perhaps it was written all over her, this new state of being in love. Perhaps it was simply that fathers had a sense about these things. "You were gone a long time," Theodore said carefully, setting aside the mining report he had been reading. "Just visiting the cemetery again." Rosalind could have lied. It would have been easier, safer. But she had promised Xavier honesty, and she owed her father the same. "No, I was at the spring talking with Xavier Morrow." Theodore's expression went through several shifts, surprise giving way to understanding and then concern. "I see. And how long has this been going on?" "A few weeks. We have been meeting and talking." Rosalind sat down across from him, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I care for him, father, deeply." "Rosalind." Theodore rubbed his face tiredly. "He is a good man, I will give him that. But he is also a drifter, someone with no roots, no prospects beyond the gun on his hip and his skill in the saddle. What kind of life could he give you?" "Maybe not the life you imagined for me," Rosalind admitted, "but possibly the life I want for myself. Do you even know what you want?" Theodore's voice rose slightly. "You are young, and he is handsome and different from the men you are used to. But infatuation is not the same as love, and love is not always enough to build a life on." "I know that." Rosalind kept her voice steady. "But I also know that I would rather try to build something real with Xavier than settle for comfort with someone I do not love. Mother told me before she died not to let myself get buried under expectations. I am trying to honor that." The mention of his wife softened Theodore's expression. "Your mother was a remarkable woman. I loved her very much. She loved you too. But she also had regrets, father, dreams she gave up, parts of herself she suppressed to be the wife you needed." Rosalind leaned forward. "I do not want to live with those kinds of regrets. I want to be fully myself, and Xavier lets me be that. He sees me, all of me, not just the proper daughter or the suitable wife." Theodore was silent for a long moment, his expression troubled. Finally he spoke. "I will not forbid this. You are 22 years old enough to make your own choices. But I will not pretend I think this is wise either. Morrow is a good man, but he is also someone who has spent 8 years running from attachment. What makes you think he will stay now? Because he loves me." Rosalind said it with quiet confidence. "And because I think he is tired of running. Sometimes people just need a reason to stop, father. I want to be his reason. And if you are wrong, if he leaves anyway, then I will hurt and I will heal, and I will know I tried for something real instead of accepting something safe." Rosalind stood, moving to kneel beside her father's chair. "I need you to trust me. Trust that you raised me well enough to make good choices, even if they are not the choices you would make for me." Theodore reached out, cupping her face with one weathered hand. "You are so much like your mother, that same fierce heart, that same unwillingness to be contained." His eyes glistened. "All right, I will trust you, though I reserve the right to worry. I would expect nothing less." Rosalind kissed his cheek. "Thank you, father. This means everything to me. Just promise me one thing." Theodore's voice was serious. "Promise me you will not lose yourself in him. That you will hold onto your own dreams and desires even as you explore this path together." "I promise." And Rosalind meant it. Loving Xavier did not mean disappearing into him. It meant becoming more fully herself with him beside her. Over the next months, Xavier and Rosalind's courtship became public knowledge in Coolidge. It raised eyebrows, certainly. The mine owner's daughter and the wandering cowboy made for juicy gossip. But Theodore's acceptance of the relationship lent it legitimacy, and gradually people adjusted to seeing them together. Xavier continued working for the Palmer mine, but he also started taking on other jobs in town. He helped the marshal occasionally, worked some shifts at the livery stable, even assisted with roundup at the nearby ranches. He was proving, Rosalind realized, that he could be more than just a drifter, that he could put down roots if he chose to. For her part, Rosalind began writing. She started with observations about the desert, following in her mother's footsteps, but then branched out into stories about the people of Coolidge, the challenges and triumphs of life in a mining town. She sent some pieces to newspapers in Tucson and Phoenix, and was thrilled when several were accepted and published. "You have real talent," Xavier told her one evening as they sat together on the porch of her father's house, a shocking level of propriety that indicated how serious their relationship had become. "Your words paint pictures. They make people and places come alive." "I never would have tried if not for you." Rosalind leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in a way that still sometimes surprised her. "You gave me permission to want things for myself. You gave yourself permission. I just did not stand in the way." Xavier wrapped his arm around her. "Though I am glad I was part of your awakening, as you call it. More than just part of it. You were the catalyst." Rosalind turned to look up at him. "You unearthed feelings I never knew existed, Xavier. Before you, I was sleepwalking through my life. Now I am wide awake, and everything is more vivid and real." "I feel the same." Xavier's voice was soft. "You took a closed, cautious man and reminded him what it feels like to hope, to plan beyond the next town, the next job. You gave me a reason to imagine a future instead of just existing in an endless present." They sat together as the desert night fell around them, comfortable in silence and in each other's presence. It was not always easy, negotiating their relationship. Xavier still struggled sometimes with old instincts to run when things got too intense. Rosalind still bumped up against the limitations society placed on women, even progressive women who wrote for newspapers. But they worked through challenges together, talking honestly even when conversations were difficult. They made compromises, found middle ground, learned each other's needs and boundaries. It was messy and human and real, and Rosalind would not have traded it for anything. As autumn arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and slightly less brutal sun, Xavier surprised her by asking Theodore for permission to propose. The conversation happened at the mine office, man to man, and Theodore later told Rosalind about it. "He was nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs," Theodore said with amusement. "But he was also serious and respectful. He told me he loved you, that he wanted to build a life here in Coolidge, that he would spend every day trying to be worthy of you." "What did you say?" Rosalind's heart was racing. "I told him no man would ever be quite worthy of you, but that he came closer than most." Theodore smiled. "And I gave him my blessing, though I suspect you would have married him regardless." "Probably," Rosalind admitted with a grin. "But I am glad I do not have to choose." Xavier proposed 3 days later, at the spring where so much of their relationship had unfolded. He had nothing elaborate planned, no grand gestures, just the two of them and the desert sunset. "I know I am not what you were supposed to want," Xavier said, down on one knee on the dusty earth. "I know I bring you a life that will be harder than the one you could have had, but I love you with everything I am, Rosalind Palmer." You are my home, my future, my reason for finally stopping running. Will you marry me? The ring was simple. A silver band with a small turquoise stone, probably all he could afford on a cowboy's wages. It was the most beautiful thing Rosalind had ever seen. Yes, she said, pulling him to his feet and kissing him thoroughly. Yes, 1,000 times yes. You are exactly what I was supposed to want, Xavier. You are what I do want, today and every day. They married in November of 1882 in the small church in Coolidge with the whole town in attendance. Rosalind wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and carried wildflowers gathered from the desert. Xavier wore new clothes purchased for the occasion, looking uncomfortable in the starched collar but devastating nonetheless. Theodore walked her down the aisle and she saw tears in his eyes as he placed her hand in Xavier's. "Take care of her," he whispered to Xavier. "She is my whole world." "I will, sir. I promise." And Xavier's voice was solemn with the weight of the vow. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When Xavier kissed his bride, a cheer went up from the assembled guests. Margaret Sullivan, serving as maid of honor, wiped her eyes and declared it the most romantic wedding she had ever seen. The reception was held at the Palmer house, with food and dancing and celebration that lasted into the night. Rosalind danced with her husband, with her father, with half the men in town. But her eyes kept returning to Xavier, this man who had chosen to stop running to build a life, to love her fully and completely. Later, in the quiet of their new home, a small house on the edge of town that Theodore had given them as a wedding gift, Xavier pulled her close. "Are you happy?" he asked, the question vulnerable despite everything. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be." Rosalind traced the line of his jaw. "Are you?" "Terrified," Xavier admitted. "But yes, happy. You make me believe in things I stopped believing in years ago. Partnership, home. A future worth planning for. We will build that future together." Rosalind kissed him softly. "Day by day, choice by choice. It will not always be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is." Xavier swept her into his arms, carrying her toward their bedroom. "But I am done with easy, Rosalind Morrow. I am ready for real, even when real is hard, especially when I am facing it with you." Their first years of marriage had challenges, as all marriages do. Money was sometimes tight, since Xavier refused to just live off Palmer wealth and insisted on making his own way. He continued working various jobs around Coolidge, building a reputation as someone reliable and skilled. Rosalind kept writing, expanding her work to include longer pieces about life in the Arizona Territory. Some of her articles were picked up by publications in the East, bringing her a small but growing readership. They learned each other's rhythms, the give and take of sharing a life. Xavier was neat almost to the point of compulsion, a habit from years of living out of saddlebags where everything had its place. Rosalind was more scattered, her creative mind jumping from project to project, leaving half-finished writings scattered around their small house. They negotiated, compromised, sometimes argued, and always, eventually, found their way back to common ground. Theodore remained a presence in their lives, stopping by often for dinner, helping Xavier with various projects around their property. He had aged noticeably since the wedding, moving more slowly, and Rosalind worried about him living alone in the big house on the hill. "He is lonely," she told Xavier one evening. "I think he misses having family around constantly." "He could remarry," Xavier suggested. "He is not that old, and there are widows in town who would be interested." But Theodore showed no inclination to seek companionship that way. "I had my great love," he told Rosalind when she gently broached the subject. "Your mother was everything to me. I am content with my memories and with watching you build your own life." In the spring of 1884, Rosalind discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She was 24 now, old enough to be a mother, but the thought of bringing a life into the harsh desert world still felt overwhelming. Xavier's reaction was pure delight mixed with his own fear. "I do not know how to be a father," he admitted, his hand resting on her still flat belly. "I barely remember mine before he started drinking. What if I am terrible at it? You will not be." Rosalind covered his hand with hers. "You are steady and strong and patient. You will be wonderful. You have more faith in me than I have in myself. That is what love is, at least partly. Believing in each other, even when we struggle to believe in ourselves." She pulled his hand up to kiss his palm. "We will figure it out together, just like we figure everything else out." Theodore was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. He immediately began making plans, insisting on paying for a doctor from Tucson to attend the birth, starting a college fund with money from the mine. His energy and enthusiasm were infectious, helping to ease some of Rosalind's fears. The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat was brutal, and Rosalind felt enormous and uncomfortable. But Xavier was attentive, bringing her water, fanning her when she felt overheated, rubbing her aching back. He read to her in the evenings from newspapers and dime novels, anything to distract her from discomfort. "Thank you," she said one particularly difficult night when she could not get comfortable enough to sleep, "for taking care of me. Where else would I be?" Xavier smoothed her hair back from her face. "You are carrying our child, Rosalind. The least I can do is make you as comfortable as possible. Some men would leave this to women, would not want to be involved in the messy reality of pregnancy. I am not some men." Xavier's voice was firm. "We are in this together, remember. That was the deal from the start." Their son was born in October of 1884, arriving early and fast after a labor that terrified Xavier, despite the doctor's assurances that everything was normal. When the doctor finally placed the squalling infant in his arms, Xavier looked at Rosalind with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you." The words were inadequate for what he was feeling, but Rosalind understood. They named him Daniel, after Xavier's father from before the drinking started, when Xavier's memories of him were still good. Daniel Theodore Morrow, carrying pieces of both their families forward into the future. Theodore was besotted with his grandson, visiting almost daily, holding the baby with surprising gentleness for such a rough-handed man. "He looks like you," he told Xavier. Same blue eyes, same serious expression. "Poor kid," Xavier joked, but he was clearly pleased. Parenthood transformed them both. Xavier discovered depths of protectiveness and tenderness he had not known he possessed. Rosalind found strength she had not realized she had, managing the demands of an infant while still pursuing her writing when she could steal moments. Margaret Sullivan, who had married a banker and had 2 children of her own, was a frequent visitor. "Welcome to the exhausting joy of motherhood," she said, bouncing Daniel on her hip while Rosalind tried to make tea with shaking hands from lack of sleep. "It gets easier, I promise. Or at least you get better at managing it." "I do not know how anyone does this with multiple children," Rosalind said. "One infant is more work than I ever imagined." "And yet you will probably do it again anyway," Margaret said knowingly. "Because despite the exhaustion, you love him so much it physically hurts, and you will want to experience that again." She was right, of course. Despite the sleepless nights and the constant demands, Rosalind could not imagine her life without Daniel. And when Xavier looked at their son with such love and wonder, she fell in love with her husband all over again, seeing this new dimension of him. When Daniel was 6 months old, tragedy struck. Theodore suffered a seizure while at the mine office. by the time they got him to Dr. Sullivan, there was nothing to be done. He died that evening with Rosalind holding one hand and Xavier the other. "I am so proud of you," were among Theodore's last words to his daughter. "You built a real life, not just a comfortable one. Your mother would be so proud, too. I love you, Father." Rosalind could barely speak through her tears. "Thank you for everything, for supporting me, for accepting Xavier, for believing in us." "How could I not?" Theodore's smile was weak but genuine. "You two prove that love can bridge any divide if the people are brave enough." He looked at Xavier. "Take care of my girls, both of them, and the boy." "Always, sir. You have my word." Xavier's voice was rough with emotion. Theodore died peacefully a few hours later, simply closing his eyes and not opening them again. Rosalind grieved deeply, the loss of her last parent hitting her hard despite knowing it was inevitable eventually. Xavier held her through the worst of it, caring for Daniel when she could not manage, being the steady presence she needed. The funeral was huge, nearly everyone in Coolidge turning out to pay respects to a man who had been, by mining owner standards, fair and decent. Rosalind got through it in a numb haze, only truly breaking down later in the privacy of their home. "I keep thinking of things I want to tell him," she sobbed against Xavier's chest. "Stupid little things like how Daniel smiled this morning, or that I sold another article. And then I remember he is gone and I will never tell him anything again." "He knew you loved him," Xavier said, holding her tight. "And he died knowing you were happy, that you had built the life you wanted. That is not nothing, Rosalind. That is everything." Theodore had left his estate in order. The mine went to Rosalind with Xavier named as co-owner and manager. It was a shock, discovering they were now mine owners, suddenly responsible for dozens of employees and all the complexity that entailed. "Your father trusted us with his legacy," Xavier said, looking at the paperwork with something like panic. "I do not know if I am qualified for this." "Neither am I," Rosalind admitted. "But we will learn, same as we have learned everything else, together." And they did learn, though it was challenging. Xavier threw himself into understanding mining operations, spending long hours talking to the foremen and experienced miners, learning the business from the ground up. Rosalind focused on the financial side, working with the company accountant to understand profit margins and investment strategies. They made changes too, improvements Theodore had considered but never implemented. Better safety equipment for the miners, slightly higher wages, a doctor on retainer specifically for mine injuries. It cut into profits but increased loyalty and productivity, and more importantly, it felt right. "We are not just extracting silver from the earth," Rosalind said during one of their planning sessions. "We are responsible for the well-being of the people doing that extraction. It matters how we do this." Xavier agreed completely. His years as a working man gave him perspective that many mine owners lacked. He knew what it was like to be at the mercy of an employer's whims, to work dangerous jobs for barely enough pay. He was determined to be better. The town's respect for them grew as they proved themselves as owners. They were not absentee wealthy people bleeding the mine dry. They were present, involved, constantly looking for ways to improve both the operation and the lives of those who worked there. Life settled into a new rhythm. Rosalind continued writing, now often about mining life and the challenges of making industry humane. Her articles appeared in progressively more prominent publications, and she even received an offer to compile them into a book. Xavier managed the day-to-day operations of the mine, earning the respect of workers who appreciated having an owner who understood their work firsthand. Daniel grew from infant to toddler to little boy, showing signs of his father's seriousness and his mother's curiosity. He loved the desert, would beg Xavier to take him riding, and already showed a fascination with how things worked. He is going to be an engineer or an inventor, Rosalind predicted, watching 3-year-old Daniel take apart and reassemble a wooden puzzle box for the 10th time. Look how focused he is. He gets that from you, Xavier said. That intensity when something captures your interest. And the patience to figure things out comes from you. Rosalind leaned against her husband, comfortable after 5 years of marriage in a way that still sometimes surprised her. We made a good human. We did. Xavier wrapped his arm around her. I am thinking we should make another one. Rosalind turned to look at him. Are you ready for that? Another baby, all the chaos that brings? I am. Xavier's expression was certain. I love our life, Rosalind. I love you. I love Daniel. I love this strange, unexpected path we are on. I want more of it. Their daughter arrived in the summer of 1887, a tiny, fierce creature they named Sarah after Rosalind's mother. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes, and from the start, she was stubborn and strong-willed. This one is going to give us trouble, Xavier said with equal parts exasperation and delight as 6-month-old Sarah screamed her displeasure at something. She knows what she wants and she is not shy about demanding it. She is perfect, Rosalind said, bouncing their daughter. And yes, probably going to be trouble, but the best kind of trouble. With 2 children, life became even more full. Daniel was a good big brother, though he sometimes seemed baffled by his sister's intensity. Xavier and Rosalind navigated parenthood together, dividing responsibilities, supporting each other through the exhausting early years. The mine continued to prosper under their management. They invested profits back into the operation and the town, helping fund a proper school, contributing to the church expansion, ensuring Coolidge grew in ways that benefited everyone, not just the wealthy. Margaret Sullivan visited often, and she and Rosalind maintained their close friendship. You did it, Margaret said one afternoon, watching Xavier play with both children in the yard. You built exactly the life you wanted, the great romance with the wandering cowboy, and it actually worked. It worked because we both chose it every day. Rosalind watched her husband lift Daniel onto his shoulders while Sarah clung to his leg. He stopped running and I stopped hiding. We built something real together. You are still disgustingly romantic after all these years. But Margaret smiled. It gives me hope watching you too. That marriages can stay passionate and real instead of just becoming comfortable arrangements. We have our difficult moments, Rosalind admitted. We are both stubborn, both have strong opinions, but we have also built communication and trust. When things are hard, we talk instead of withdrawing. I think that makes all the difference. As the years passed, Rosalind and Xavier aged into their lives together. The mine remained successful, though they began training managers to handle more of the daily operations as they focused on their children. Daniel grew into a serious, intelligent boy who did indeed show aptitude for engineering and mechanics. Sarah was as fierce as predicted, uninterested in traditional feminine pursuits, preferring to ride and explore the desert with her father. She reminds me of you, Xavier told Rosalind one evening. That same refusal to be contained or told what she should want. God help us, Rosalind said with a laugh. Though I suppose turnabout is fair play after what I put my father through. When Daniel turned 12, Xavier began teaching him about the mine operations, not because he expected his son to take over eventually, but because he wanted Daniel to understand where their family's wealth came from and the responsibility that came with it. Money is not just a resource to spend, Xavier told his son as they toured the mine tunnels. It represents the work of real people, their time and labor and sometimes their safety. Managing wealth means being a steward, not just a consumer. Do you understand? Daniel nodded seriously. I think so. It is like when Mother says that writing gives her a platform, so she has to be thoughtful about what she says because her words have weight. Exactly like that. Xavier was pleased by the comparison. Everything we have has weight and responsibility attached. Never forget that. Sarah, when old enough to understand, absorbed similar lessons but chafed more against the constraints they implied. I do not want to manage a mine, she declared at 10 years old. I want to do something else, something mine. Then do something else, Rosalind said easily. You are not required to follow in anyone's footsteps, Sarah. You are required to find your own path and walk it well. But the mine is the family business. The mine is one part of our lives, Xavier corrected, but it does not define us or limit you. Your mother is a writer. I was a cowboy before I was a mine owner. We made our own paths. You should too. That freedom to choose, to be themselves while still being part of the family, was perhaps Xavier and Rosalind's greatest gift to their children. They provided stability and opportunity but not obligation, support but not control. In 1895, when Daniel was 11 and Sarah was 8, Xavier took his family on an extended trip. They traveled to San Francisco, something Rosalind had always wanted to do. They rode the train across the desert and into California, stayed in a real hotel, saw the ocean that Xavier had described years ago. Daniel was fascinated by the engineering of the bridges and buildings. Sarah loved the wildness of the sea, the way the waves never stopped moving. Rosalind absorbed everything, taking notes for future articles about travel and the changing West, and Xavier watched his family experience new things with profound contentment. Are you happy? Rosalind asked him one evening as they walked along the beach while the children hunted for shells. Happier than I ever thought I could be, Xavier admitted. There was a time I thought freedom meant being alone, moving constantly, never attaching to anything or anyone. But this, what we have, this is real freedom. The choice to stay, to build, to love fully. I was wrong about so much, Rosalind. You were not wrong. You were protecting yourself the only way you knew how. She took his hand. But you were brave enough to change when change was needed. That is what matters. You made me brave. Xavier brought her hand to his lips. You made me believe I could be more than just a survivor passing through. You gave me a reason to become fully alive. We gave that to each other. Rosalind leaned against his shoulder, watching the sunset paint the ocean in colors that rivaled any desert sky. We unearthed each other, Xavier. Found the people we were meant to be underneath, all the fear and protection. They stood together as the light faded, two people who had taken a chance on love, despite all the logical reasons not to, and had built something lasting and real. Their children played nearby, products of that love, carrying it forward into an uncertain future. When they returned to Coolidge, life resumed its patterns, but something had shifted. The trip had reminded them that there was a wider world beyond the Arizona desert, and they began to imagine different possibilities for their lives. What if we did not stay in Coolidge forever? Rosalind asked one night. What if, once the children are grown, we traveled more? Saw the places we have only read about. I thought you loved it here. Xavier was surprised. This is home. It is home, Rosalind agreed. But home can be a place you return to, not a place you never leave. I spent so much of my youth feeling trapped. Now I want to explore while we are still young enough to enjoy it. Xavier considered this, and slowly his expression shifted to match her excitement. We could do that. Hire managers for the mine, people we trust. Take months at a time to travel. Come back when we miss the desert. Leave again when we feel restless. Exactly. Rosalind felt the old exhilaration of possibility. We are not either settled or wandering, Xavier. We can be both. We can choose our own path that does not fit anyone else's expectations. Still trying to make your own rules. But Xavier was smiling. All right, my love, let's do it. Let's build a life that belongs entirely to us. As their children grew, Xavier and Rosalind indeed began to travel more extensively. They saw the Grand Canyon, visited Texas, where Xavier showed them the land where he had grown up, traveled to Chicago and New York. Rosalind wrote about their experiences, her articles becoming popular for their vivid descriptions and insightful observations about the changing American landscape. Daniel, as predicted, went to college in California to study engineering. Sarah, true to her fierce, independent nature, became a veterinarian, one of the first women in the territory to do so. Both children carried forward their parents' example of choosing their own paths, despite social expectations. Xavier and Rosalind aged together, their love deepening and evolving. The passion remained, but it was joined by profound friendship and partnership. They knew each other completely, the good and the difficult, and chose each other anyway, every day. You remember the first time we met? Rosalind asked Xavier on their 20th wedding anniversary. They were back at the spring, their special place, watching another sunset paint the sky. You mean when I pulled you out of the line of fire and you looked at me like I was either your savior or insane? Xavier pulled her close. Yes, I remember. I thought you were beautiful and pampered and entirely out of my league. I thought you were different from anyone I had ever met. Real in a way most people were not. Rosalind traced circles on his chest. I was right. So was I. You were out of my league, still are. Xavier kissed the top of her head. But somehow you loved me anyway. Not somehow, because you saw me, really saw me, and called me to be brave. Rosalind looked up at him. You unearthed feelings I never knew existed, Xavier. You still do every day. And you gave a wanderer a home, not a place but a person to come home to. Xavier cupped her face gently. Best decision I ever made, staying for you. They held each other as the desert night fell, two people who had gambled on love and won. The years ahead would bring challenges and joys in equal measure. They would see their children marry and have children of their own. They would travel to all the places they had dreamed of. They would grow old together, their love a constant through all the changes life brought. But in that moment, at the spring where so much had begun, they were simply two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a life of beauty and meaning together. The desert stretched around them, honest and true, and they were part of its eternal story of survival, adaptation, and the triumph of choosing life fully lived over mere existence. Years later, when their grandchildren asked Xavier how he had known Rosalind was the one, he would think back to that first conversation by the spring, her honesty and hunger for authentic experience, her courage in asking for what she wanted. He would think of all the moments since, thousands of them, building a life together day by day. But what he would tell the grandchildren was simpler. She saw who I really was underneath all my armor, and she loved that person. And when I looked at her, I saw someone extraordinary trying to break free from a cage of expectations. I knew if we were brave enough to choose each other, we could set each other free. And we did. Every day we still do. Rosalind, when asked the same question, would smile and say, He made me believe that love was not a cage but a pair of wings, that two people together could fly farther than either could alone. And he was right. And that was the truth that sustained them through decades of marriage, through challenges and triumphs, through the ordinary and extraordinary moments that made up a life. They had chosen each other, and in doing so, had chosen to become fully themselves. It was the gift they gave each other every day, the promise renewed with every sunrise. To see, to honor, to love the person the other truly was, without condition or constraint. In the end, their love story became part of Coolidge's history, told and retold. The mine owner's daughter and the cowboy who had nothing but his skill and his honesty, who built a love that bridged worlds and lasted a lifetime. It was a story about courage, about choosing your own path, about the transformative power of being truly seen and loved. Xavier and Rosalind lived long lives, well into their 70s, unusual for the time and place. They died within months of each other, as couples sometimes do when one cannot imagine existing without the other. They were buried side by side in the Coolidge cemetery, their headstones simple, but bearing an inscription they had chosen together. Here lie two souls who unearthed each other and found treasure. Their children and grandchildren carried forward the lessons they had taught about courage, authenticity, and choosing love even when it was difficult or unconventional. The mine they had managed so carefully continued to prosper and support the town for another generation before finally playing out. But the family's commitment to community and fairness became their lasting legacy. And sometimes, people claimed, if you went to the spring in the foothills at sunset, you could feel something there, a presence of old love and promises kept, a reminder that some bonds transcend even death. Whether true or merely romantic fancy, it was a story Coolidge treasured, a piece of their history that showed how individual choices ripple outward, affecting communities and generations. The love between Rosalind Palmer and Xavier Morrow had been real and deep and transformative, not just for them but for everyone whose lives they touched. They had shown that love could bridge any divide if the people involved were brave enough, honest enough, and committed enough to the work of building something lasting and true. Their story was not a fairy tale with perfect people living happily ever after without struggle. It was the story of two flawed, courageous individuals who chose each other and kept choosing each other, who built happiness day by day through communication, compromise, and profound respect. It was, in the end, the most ordinary and most extraordinary thing in the world. A love that lasted, that deepened, that fulfilled the promise of those early moments by the spring when two souls recognized each other and decided to take a chance on something real. And in taking that chance, they had lived fully and truly, exactly as Rosalind's mother had wished for her daughter all those years ago. They had not let themselves be buried under expectations or fear. They had chosen life, chosen love, chosen each other. And that choice, renewed every day for decades, had made all the difference.